Hey folks, I'm Matt and welcome to The Good Troubleshow. My next two guests have important stories that you will want to hear. It's about your national security and what the United States Air Force does not want you to know. I have to also point out that it was the hard work of researcher Robert Hastings who wrote the book UFO and Nukes. This book was widely studied by the government and the UFO task force at the Pentagon. The country owes a debt of gratitude to Robert Hastings and his work. So please welcome retired United States Air Force Captains Robert Salas and David Schindele. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
So you both have very important stories to share with the American public. And so both of you worked as launch control officers for a Minuteman nuclear-tipped ICBMs in the 1960s. So Robert, explain to everyone what exactly is the Minuteman ICBM?
Well, it's ICBM stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. So it was part of the strategic defense of the United States. In case we were attacked by nuclear war, the missiles would be launched to respond. Missiles were capable of going thousands of miles. They were solid fuel rockets, so they could be launched immediately. They didn't need to be fueled or anything like that. They had an inertial guidance system. And they had nuclear weapons. At the time, I've read in some reports, these are open reports, they had an 800 kiloton bomb. With respect to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, they were about 20 kilotons. So you can imagine the immense power of these weapons.
And there were hundreds of these back in the day, right? Hundreds of these missiles that the United States fielded?
Yeah, at Malmstrom Air Force Base, we had 15 launch control facilities, so each had 10 missiles. At any time, we had 150, and that was just the one base. Of course, David was at Minot Air Force Base, so I had, I assume, another 150. Is that right, Dave?
It was the same, yes. 15 flights.
Yeah.
So, David, how exactly are these nuclear missiles controlled?
Controlled?
Well, in other words, how many people control them? Is it 2 people sitting the ground per missile? How are these missiles managed?
Well, let me start really from how the layout is. Each wing at the Air Force Base has 15 launch control centers, situated many miles around the base. My base was 13 miles north of Minot, North Dakota, and these missile flights, the 15 missile flights, or launch control centers, were spread circular around the town many miles away, 30 to 50 and sometimes more miles away. Each launch control center, each flight, controlled 10 missiles. And the launch control facility, which is a facility above ground, contained 6 security guards, a cook, and a site manager. And down below, 60 feet below ground, was a hardened capsule where 2 officers sat at a launch control console or in the launch control center to manage and keep watch over these missiles and the security of them. So that's the way it worked.
So what you guys were on, so there's, backing up a bit, so there's something called the nuclear triad. So you have land-based nuclear delivery, which was the Minuteman ICBM, air delivery, bombers, and then sea delivery was sea launch ballistic missiles. So the idea being that an adversary can take out one leg of a triad or of the triad, and maybe not disable it completely, but you have the other 2 legs to stand on. And part of all this has been based on something called MAD, or mutually assured destruction. where one side knows that if they launch something or launch nuclear weapons at the United States, they're going to incur damage that's unacceptable. One of the legs, or one of the premises for MAD to work is the other side has to know that the other side is ready to respond at a moment's notice. And
we call that nuclear deterrence.
Exactly, yeah. So if you have a large section of the United States' nuclear deterrent disabled in a way that we're about to get into, that jeopardizes our national security. Now, for both of you guys, or anyone that sits behind those launch consoles, I mean, that's an enormous amount of responsibility controlling weapons of this magnitude. So what just so people at home understand, what kind of vetting goes on with someone that is holding your position? What kind of vetting, security checks, and as you know, say for instance, you're a year into the job. Do you do those security checks again? In just kind of a general way, how is all of that handled? Robert, if you want to maybe touch on that.
Okay. Well, as far as the vetting goes, I suppose we were selected based on our records. And, of course, we did have to qualify to be in the positions we were in. In other words, we had to be tested on our knowledge. We went through pretty extensive training. I forget, at least 6 months, I think, of training at various bases. And we were checked on a regular basis. Dave, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, one of the main qualifications was we had to have a security background check, and we all had to obtain our top secret clearances. And so each of us missileers had a top secret clearance. And as Bob said, we were vetted all along the way during our training to make sure that we were stable. And I can remember questionnaires given to us where we would evaluate other people in our group or in our training session. So we're well looked at.
So it's this isn't something that obviously anybody can get into. So if you have something in your past or are deemed not mentally stable or to perform the job, there's no way you're going to even get close to nuclear weapons.
Right.
I think that's right.
Okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. So Robert, let's jump right into it. Tell us your story, please.
Well, real quick, briefly, I was on duty as the missile on a two-man crew at Oscar Flight on March 24th, 1967. My commander, Fred Mywald, was taking a rest break, and like Dave said, we had 6 guards upstairs, and first I got a call from the topside guard that said they were seeing strange lights in the sky, doing very odd maneuvers, high speed, stopping on a dime, reversing course, no engine noise, and he said they were not aircraft, sir. And I even said, you mean like UFOs? Because we had reports in the local newspaper of people seeing strange things in the sky around Great Falls. So I was just joking with him, but I had no real reason to believe these were UFOs other than the fact that he was dead serious about these not being aircraft, and they were flying above the facility. I hung up on him, and then 5 minutes later he calls back. And this time he's very frightened. He says, when I calmed him down, he was able to tell me that he was looking at a red-orange light, approximately 40, 50 feet in diameter, just hovering above the front gate of our facility. He had all the guards out there with their weapons drawn. He wanted me to tell him what to do next. This time I took him very seriously. He sounded very frightened. And I said, make sure nothing enters the secured facility. So he hung up the phone. I went to tell my commander, who was taking a rest break, about these calls. And all of a sudden, we both hear these klaxons, actually bells and klaxons, whistles, whatever, going off. We look over at our control board, and all our missiles are going into a no-go condition, unlaunchable. So, as a result, we go through our procedures. We lost all 10 missiles. We go through our procedures. He calls command post, and I call upstairs because we had 2 of the sites had incursion lights, or lights that showed there was something trying to enter 2 of the launch facilities. And I had to ask them, well, was that object still there? And it had just flown off. And I had to send them out to those sites. They reported back seeing the objects again over those 2 sites. My commander then, after this phone call to the command post, turns to me and says the same thing happened at another flight. At that time, wow. I thought he meant that evening, but it turns out I later discovered that it was Echo Flight, which was another flight about 35 miles away, but the shutdown of those missiles happened about 8 days earlier. I didn't know this until after I started researching this many decades later.
Now, and just kind of going back on it, so the launch facility, so there's a launch control center that the 2 of you are buried underground, correct?
Yes. Well, not buried, but yes, we're underground, about 60 feet.
Okay, and got it. Okay, and then the launch facility, those are the individual missile silos, the 10 individual missile silos that you are in control of.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And so the flight of missiles.
If I could interrupt there.
Yeah, please.
The launch control facility was the above ground facility which was above our capsule. The launch facilities, or silos, were located, in my case, 4 to 14 miles away.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, great. So Bob, were any of the missiles damaged? So they were taken offline. 2 questions. How long was it before they were brought back online, and was there any damage done to the missiles?
Right. Well, it took about a day to get them back online. What happened is we got indications of guidance and control system failure. Like I said, we had an inertial guidance system. It required a stable platform, gyroscopes, that sort of thing. And what this object was able to do was simply to upset that level platform of the guidance system. It actually sent a signal to what's called the logic coupler. It's part of the equipment that's used to work with the information received by the inertial system. So it would have to have penetrated 60 feet of earth and concrete, this signal, penetrate 10 separate triply shielded cables, and then send signals to each of these logic couplers separately to 10 missiles, and do that within portions of seconds. We lost all our missiles within about 10 seconds.
And if I remember correctly, so Boeing was the major contractor that dealt with the Minuteman system. During this or post event, did Boeing send any engineers out to try and figure out exactly what had occurred?
Yes, Boeing did their own investigation. headed up by a man by the name of Robert Kaminsky. We communicated with Kaminsky after I started researching this in 1994. He reported back by mail, and we've got it in writing, that they were not able to find anything significant to report as far as the cause. There was no power failure, no lightning, no damage to equipment, by the way. None of these missiles were damaged on a permanent basis. They were simply had to be retargeted and go through a retargeting procedure, which took about 24 hours, like I said. Boeing did do a bench test and identified the possible failure mode as what I just described, sending a signal to something called the logic coupler, and it was just a momentary signal that upset the entire guidance system.
Wow.
That's all that happened.
So obviously, whatever these things were, they knew what they were doing, and it wasn't out of any sort of natural cause. Wasn't like lightning or any bad weather or anything in the area.
Absolutely, they knew exactly what they were doing.
So Dave, I understand you had a somewhat similar experience.
Yes, except it happened to the crew that my commander and I relieved. And so we were the first ones to get to the launch control facility and find out what had happened overnight. But to start from the beginning here, when I woke up that morning, I heard a television newscast said that residents of Mulhall, North Dakota, which is about 40 miles north of Minot, North Dakota, some of the residents of town saw strange lights overnight. And that's essentially all that newscast said, but that caught my attention because I was scheduled to go to November Flight, which is 3 miles west of that town. And then I lived in town, and I knew I was going to November Flight, and I traveled to the base for our pre-departure crew briefing, which all 15 missile crews would attend early in the morning prior to going to the individual launch control centers. At that briefing, we were told that a few missiles at November Flight had gone off alert, and which again caught my attention, plus the attention of a few other crew members there at the briefing. When the briefing was over, some of those officers came up to my commander and I and said, "Did you hear the newscast this morning?" And I said, "Yes." And my commander had heard that newscast also. Anyway, my commander and I then took the standard Air Force blue station wagon and traveled to the November Launch Control Facility, which was about 37.5 miles from base. And we entered through the security fence, and my commander immediately went to the security section of the above-ground facility, and I proceeded to inspect the above-ground surroundings around the building to make sure everything is in order. I entered the back door of that facility, above-ground facility, and the site manager greeted me, a tech sergeant. And he said, "Did you hear what happened overnight?" And I says, "All I heard was that residents of Mulhall, North Dakota saw strange lights overnight." He says, "Well, follow me." And he took me to the day room of the facility, to the west-facing windows, and he described to me the object that he saw hovering just beyond the security fence that night. And it was quite a story. He said this object with bright flashing lights, that's the only way he could describe it, just hovered just beyond the security fence. And then after a while, that object hovered to the right and went out of sight from those west-facing windows. And the object then came toward the main gate, just behind the main gate, where it was visible by the security guards in the security section of the facility. In the meantime, the site manager would continue to tell me about the object, And some security guards and other people there at the facility joined him and telling me what had happened. And you could tell by the emotion on their faces and in their voices that it was a very frightening experience. In fact, none of them wanted to go out and face this thing, whatever it was. And then I joined my commander in the security section, and we were handed our 38 revolvers that we carried with us. And we proceeded down the elevator 60 feet below ground to where we had to open a couple blast doors to get into the capsule. The blast door to the capsule was open for us, and we walked in. My commander and I immediately looked at the launch control console located at the far end of the capsule. And the console showed all red lights across the board. All missiles were off alert and unlaunchable. And so we went ahead with crew changeover to relieve that crew, and then they told us the story of what happened, and it was just amazing. My commander and I would, what's going on here?
Sure.
And we and the other crew discussed the possibilities from what the guards topside were telling us, and from what happened we could see on the launch control console, and we thought it must have been an EMF pulse of some sort. What else could send a signal to those missiles? But that signal, when we thought about it, had to be a special signal of some kind to affect those missiles the way it did. Because like Bob, we all had guidance and control system malfunction for every one of the missiles. We were able to query those missiles. You press a button for each missile, and it'd come back and talk to us what was wrong with the missile. And the primary thing that stood out was the guidance and control system malfunction.
What is an EMF pulse?
Can you explain that, Bob?
Electromagnetic pulse is a just what it sounds. It's I really can't explain it exactly, but it's more like a power pulse that affects electronic equipment. Nuclear weapons, when they're exploded, give off an EMP or electromagnetic pulse.
Okay, and going back, so what did the guards describe exactly how big this object was that was floating above the facility?
For me, the site manager said there was bright flashing lights out there, and he held out his arms to indicate to me how wide this thing was looking out the windows. And from those, the way he held his arms and the distance beyond the fence, I figured it was about 100 feet or a little bit more away.
Wow.
And maybe 80 to 100 feet wide. My best guess.
Yeah, let me just add, in my case, what the guard was telling me, there was a very bright light. He was having trouble seeing an object inside the light, but he did eventually was able to focus on a solid object inside this bright light, and that's what he described to me as about 50 feet long.
And was it shaped like a disc or
it was
a cigar? Did they?
It was oval shaped. He said oval shaped.
Okay, so so fast forwarding. So I would imagine, Robert, there was a debriefing process that you had to go through following it with your base commander or someone like that, correct?
Squadron commander in this case. We were as soon as we landed, we were helicoptered back to the base because it was about 100 miles out. As soon as we landed, we were ordered to see our squadron commander. We were went to his office, and in his office was the squadron commander and a man from the Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI. We started to tell them what happened, but neither one of them, I guess they had both been briefed because they didn't seem to want to know the details They really wanted us to sign this non-disclosure statement. Which I objected to at first because we were already cleared above top secret. But no, we had to sign this particular document because it referred to this particular incident, and so we both signed. We both signed a non-disclosure statement stating we would never talk to anyone ever about the incident or we would suffer some very severe penalties.
So when you signed this non-disclosure agreement, were you allowed to talk about it with other missileers? Like, how specific was it?
We were not allowed to speak with anyone about it, including our spouses, family, missileers, no one in the Air Force. And one of the reasons for this is because the Air Force was the Condon investigation was ongoing at the time, and I'm sure the Air Force did not want the Condon investigators to know this had happened. I'm certain of it, because. Go ahead.
Oh, and just so, folks at home that don't know, so the Condon investigation was an investigation run by the U.S. Air Force to determine what UFOs were, if anything, correct?
All right, that's correct.
Okay.
At any rate, the next morning, I got a call from the guards at my home in town, and they begged me to come out and talk to them about the incident. They thought I knew something and wanted to discuss it, etc., something, and I just had to tell them I couldn't. I was obligated not to talk to them about anything that happened. So that was very disappointing to both myself and them.
I would imagine, so especially something like that that's just completely unlike anything that you would ever experience. I just can't even imagine what that must have been like to have this thing happen to you and not be able to speak about it. So Dave, what was your sort of debriefing process like?
Essentially, my commander and I were relieved by another crew the next morning. There's crew changer every morning, and when we took the elevator topside and reached the security center topside, I attempted to question the flight security controller who was on duty the night this thing happened, the night before. And I wanted to question him and talk to him in person about what he really saw. And he said, "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't. I've been ordered not to talk about this." And then my commander turns toward me and says, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, while you're in rest break below ground, I got a call from the Office of Special Investigations, and they told me, as far as you're concerned, it never happened," which applies to both of us. And it was a real disappointing message for me. And essentially, we were ordered that we were not to talk to each other about it even, which we didn't. Well, I must admit, a few weeks later, we had an incident where an F-106 crashed between us and the base, and we had to send security guards out. And at the time, I remember mentioning to my commander, I says, "I wonder if UFO had anything to do with this." And I thought, oh my God, I brought the subject up.
So going back, the AFOSI, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, they're a federal law enforcement agency. They're sort of the Air Force equivalent of the FBI. Would that be a fair way to sort of characterize them?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, and as far as the NDA that you were forced to sign, do you recall, like, how bad are the penalties if it were discovered you talked to your wife or a friend or revealed any of that? What would happen to you? What would be the repercussions?
I remember three things about that NDA. One is Leavenworth Prison stuck out.
Wow.
Leavenworth Prison, and I think it was at least 20, 25 years. And then there was also a monetary penalty also. So it was pretty severe.
And I would imagine, too, it would be loss of your security clearance as well.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Right. So
now, Bob had to sign an agreement. Bob had to sign an agreement that he would forever keep silent.
Right.
But I was never directed to do that. All I was told is by my commander that he received a phone call and that we were to remain silent. And when he said it came from the OSI, I knew, it was obvious that we couldn't talk.
Right. Now, so the three of us have spoken before. I wrote an op-ed for the debrief going into your two events. And one thing that I recall, Dave, you mentioning is years later, and maybe, Bob, this was the same for you. I don't remember it, Robert, that when you would go to Air Force reunions, people would come up to you and say, hey, this actually happened to me on my flight. But no one, of course, back then, especially with the non-disclosure agreements that AFOSI was requiring, there was no crosstalk. So no one knew what was happening at other bases, other flights. Is that right?
Right. But what's amazing to me is I held my tongue for 35 some years. And it wasn't until I saw on the internet the blurb about the Salas incident. And when I read that on the internet, I said, oh my God. And I thought, now I can talk. And I did. I told my wife immediately. I pointed her to a webpage on the website. I says, this happened to me at Minot. My incident happened in September 1966, and Bob's in March 1967, 6 months apart.
Wow. And Dave, what were some other stories that were relayed to you that you could share? Any sort of similar incidents at other nuclear ICBM sites?
Yeah, I didn't know about our Air Force reunions until 2010. And I've attended 6 of those reunions so far. And in 2014, I held a reunion myself in Seattle, Washington, where 30 missileers came. And then one evening, I remember it was a Thursday evening, I gave a presentation on my experience. And it was the first that anybody had heard.
Wow.
Those missileers attending had heard of this. But the first thing I did at the presentation was I asked, do any of you remember anything talk about UFOs at Minot when you were there? 7 people raised their hands.
Wow.
Then I asked, do you recall anything about a UFO incident at a launch facility when you're on duty? And 3 people raised their hands.
How big was this crowd, would you say?
60 people with wives and so forth, but about 30 missileers.
Okay.
So it opened my eyes a bit, especially when one of them said, all my missiles went off alert. And that was the crew commander that I relieved, my commander and I relieved. And so that guy is still alive, but he avoids me. He will not talk to me. He will not come out.
Okay.
Do you think? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm
Robert.
sorry. I just want to add a couple of things. Number one, there was another significant incident in 1968 at Minot Air Force Base.
That's right.
And
October.
That was very well documented. Major Bradford Runyon was the main witness. Co-pilot for a B-52 aircraft, and it disabled the launch facility. I don't want to tell the whole story right now, but what I want to state categorically here is in 1966, we lost 10 missiles at Minot. In 1967, we lost 10 missiles at Malmstrom. And then in 1968, another at least one more missile at Minot again. So,
I think it was Oscar flight.
Within the span of those 3 years, we had UFO incidents shut down at least 30 missiles.
Unbelievable.
To demonstrate that they... Now, Matt, these are not just stories. These can be verified. Like Dave said, the commander he relieved is still alive. The commander at Echo Flight at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Walter Fiegel, is still alive. These people can be subpoenaed to testify in front of Congress. And, of course, Dave and I would be willing to testify under oath. There's no question that this is an issue of importance with respect to our national security, and it ought to be looked into carefully.
I think what folks at home that may not necessarily be following the UFO topic is that Congress is wildly aware of what has been going on, and moreover, the cover-up that the Pentagon, in particular the Air Force and the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, this cover-up that's been going on for decades. And one piece of proposed legislation that I believe is in either the Senate version of the Intelligence Authorization Act, I think that's what it's called, or the National Defense Authorization Act, is whistleblower protection. And part of what this proposed law, which will hopefully, or proposed legislation that will hopefully go into law in October when President Biden would sign it, is it would allow people like yourselves, and other Air Force personnel, and actually in other areas of our defense establishment, including contractors, it would relieve them of their non-disclosure agreement and allow them to go and testify in a classified setting in a SCIF or whatnot, or in front of Congress, I would imagine, in a SCIF as well, without any sort of legal repercussion or career repercussion. It would allow people. Now, obviously, you're out with it now, but as you mentioned, there are lots of folks that are still alive, that were part of these incidents where unidentified flying objects disabled our large swaths of our nuclear deterrent. And it would allow these folks to go in and tell Congress about that. Because as much as I know that there are members of Congress that are aware of these incidents, I really don't think that these lawmakers fully understand the story. And when you're relating these stories and you're relating the emotion and the emotion that you saw on people's faces, above ground security personnel, I mean, that's significant. And we know that this was fairly widespread. It could certainly be widespread now. I haven't been able to find anything on it, but I would be very surprised if this were not still going on to some extent today. So it's important for any lawmakers that are listening here that elements of that legislation, they must pass, because without that, the Air Force and in particular the AFOSI, they're going to be able to continue to have their thumbs down on these people, and it's just a no-brainer. It's about our national security, and Congress needs to know about it, and the American people need to know about it. So just kind of rewinding a bit, this obviously this happened years ago, and both of you have had lots of time to kind of think about it. What do you think these were? Do you think, and posing this question to both of you, do you think these were from another civilization? Obviously, they're much more advanced than us. Or do you think they are ultra-terrestrial and they are here and they just maybe live in another dimension? What are your personal opinions about that?
Dave, you want to go?
Yeah. I really hate to speculate, but
speculation.
So many people have come up to me and saying, there's got to be life out there, other places, universe. It's just, the odds are totally in favor of it. And of course, the scientists all say that also. But I've been amazed at the number, since I came out, I've been amazed at the number of people have come up to me and wanting to tell me their stories. And every other day, I hear another story, including some from abductees. And I've attended some UFO conferences where people recognize me and come up and want to tell me their story. And that has really opened my eyes that, hey, it's out there. I mean, if you haven't had an experience, you probably know somebody who's had one, or you've talked to somebody who's had one. So,
Robert, what do you think?
There's no question in my mind that these are extraterrestrial craft being controlled by extraterrestrial beings. There's no way what they did to our missiles, any of our equipment could have done, either then or now, in my opinion. And I'm sure that once the investigations get going here in earnest, that not only Congress but the American public, the world public, is going to realize that that is the truth. We are being visited by advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, and so it's up to us to figure out how we're going to react and move forward.
And again, a question for both of you, and understanding this is purely speculation because we really don't have any idea. What message do you think they were sending? Do you think it was a show of force, or a message saying, you guys are going to blow yourselves up if you're not careful? What's, again, understanding of purely speculation? Robert, what do you think?
Well, like I said, they did not do any significant damage or any damage that I know of to our equipment, to the missiles themselves or the weapons. And I think they could have if they wanted to. It was not, I think, what was going on in our case, and in many other cases all over the world, by the way, where objects were seen near nuclear facilities, they were just sending us a message, and the message for me is very clear. We need to get rid of our nuclear weapons. This so-called nuclear deterrence does not work on the long term because more and more countries will want nuclear weapons. We see that already in North Korea and Iran and other places. Eventually, these weapons will be used. They've been threatened to be used by Russia already in the Ukrainian war, and so we need to work hard now to get the world together and work together to abolish nuclear weapons. And I think that was their message.
Dave, what do you think?
I agree with Bob. These objects have demonstrated a technology that's way beyond anything mankind can create. The physics out there is just out there, way out there. Our physicists don't know half of any of this. So, coming from outer space someplace, where else would it come from? I just don't know.
Got it. Yeah, and I think everything that I hear and conversations that I've had with officials on Capitol Hill is they no one knows. I mean, it's clearly here. It's clearly interfering with our military operations, operating in restricted airspace with impunity. Where they're from, what they want, why they're here. From everything I've been told, they don't really know. So, and this kind of ties into my next question. Clearly, there has been a cover-up that the government, and I don't know if it's the government writ large or the Pentagon or the intelligence community, Air Force, or a conglomeration of all of it, a cover-up to keep people like yourselves silent, so the general public and lawmakers are not aware of the national security implications that these things have had. What, in your view, is the reason, if you put on your national security hat, what would be your guess as to why this cover-up has been so extensive? And is it just fear? What are your thoughts on that?
Two words: power and greed. The secrets they have probably gleaned from recovered craft. By they, I mean this secrecy cabal of people, individuals within government who know about the real secrets. They have gleaned from recovered craft and other intelligences they got from other witnesses, etc., have probably been used to develop weapon systems or some advanced technologies. And this is very valuable, obviously, can be converted to different products. The power lies with the knowledge that they have these. They can use this information as bartering tools, I guess, with other countries. It is an international conspiracy, by the way. I hate to use that word, but it really is a conspiratorial effort that's going on by different agencies throughout the world.
And by the way, this all started at Roswell, this secrecy stuff. Yeah. Roswell really did happen, and that's when everybody involved with that was clamped down to keep the secret. That secret has been maintained through generations, and the liars don't want, has been perpetuated, and they don't want the secret out now for other reasons. They don't want to get in trouble from keeping this information from the public. The other thing is that the Defense Department doesn't want the American people to know that they cannot be protected from these objects with superior intelligence and superior technology. But these things have been evasive, elusive, and haven't really hurt anybody, except there have been a few Air Force, Navy pilots who've met their fate because of these.
Yeah, speaking of Roswell, part of this proposed legislation that Congress has put forth that will hopefully be signed into law mandates the General Accounting Office go back and examine any sort of disinformation campaign, cover-up, beginning in 1947, which is when Roswell occurred. So clearly, Congress believes that there is a there. I know Representative Tim Burchett in a recent interview. He's a Republican from Tennessee. Has spoken about that he truly thinks that there are recovered craft. And not just Roswell. There's been a long history of multiple crashes, recovered intact vehicles that are not not human made, and there's extensive examples of this happening in multiple countries. So, one thought that I heard was that in terms of the international secrecy. And would be curious what you guys think about this is, let's say that Russia has a craft and they've figured out items 1, 2, and 3 about them, but they haven't figured out item number 4. The United States has a craft, and we've figured out we've figured out number 4, but maybe another missing element of it. So if you're a country and you both possess these materials, I would think the last thing you would want to do is come out and say, oh, yeah, I've figured out X, Y, and Z, but Russia hasn't figured out Z, and now all of a sudden they go, oh, they figured that out, so now they have the full piece of the pie. What do you guys think of that?
Absolutely. I think that the way you describe it follows my thinking exactly. Not only do they share information about the objects and the technology, but they use these secrets as, like I said, bartering chips for other information that they'd like to know from the other side. Maybe it's not even related to the UFO question. But yeah, this is going on, I believe, worldwide.
Dave, what do you think?
Well, I think the American public is ready to learn the truth. In fact, they've been ready for this for decades. This stuff has been going on for so long. The American public now is not just suspicious. They know this stuff is real.
So I'm sure that there's great concern within the government, be it the Pentagon, executive branch, whatever, that if they come out and just flat out say there is a non-human intelligence that has been interacting with us for decades, if not thousands of years, that the revelation of that would cause mass panic within the public. If they come out and say they're technologically superior to us, we can't control them, we can't control our skies, we have no military countermeasures for this, what would be your message to those people in power that feel that this is not something that the American public can handle?
Can I try?
Please.
Well, for example, in the Catholic Church, I know the Pope is very interested in this subject. He's already issued statements to the effect that they recognize that we are not alone in the universe, and we're all children of God. So I don't think the religious issue would be a major issue. As far as panic, like Dave said, this is something the public in general, worldwide, is well aware of, and has been for a long time. They just want their governments to come clean and tell the truth. I seriously don't think there would be any panic about any disclosures.
I'm with you on all of that. The reality of it is undeniable. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence in their UAP report stated that these things are happening. These are craft. They're probably a small amount could be attributed to natural phenomena or man-made objects, but I believe it was in the UFO hearing that occurred in the House of Representatives. In the I'm blanking on the name of it, House Intel Committee. The two folks from the Pentagon stated that there were something like 18 documented near misses of naval aircraft that have encountered these things. So speaking of which, rewinding a bit, in this report that was provided to Congress, which was around a year ago, by the Director of Office of National Intelligence, everything in the report came from the Navy. In the testimony in the UFO hearing in front of the House Intel Committee, everything was Navy, who has been blatantly absent from this conversation really since all of this came out in the New York Times, which I believe is in 2017. The elephant in the room is the Air Force, who has said absolutely nothing. My question to you both is, what do you think? Why do you think that's the case? And do you think it has anything to do with the disabling of our nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles?
Could I just interject? During that May hearing with Mr. Moultrie and Mr. Bray in the Intelligence Committee, one of the representatives, Michael Gallagher, did mention the Malmstrom incidents, and Moultrie stated, well, he'd heard rumors but nothing official, something like that. And Gallagher followed up and asked him if he would look into it, and he agreed to do that. So I'm hoping that neither one of those two gentlemen will forget that, and there will be more discussion about that one. Anyway.
The big question is, when is the Air Force going to come out and start talking?
Right.
The last comment they ever made on this was that UFOs do not exist and pose no threat to national security. Just the composition of that sentence leads you to think that, what are they talking about? Of course, they pose no threat to national security if they don't exist, but they do exist. And the Air Force needs to start speaking up.
Yeah, let me just follow up on that.
Go ahead, Robert.
The Air Force is silent because they've got the most explaining to do. Going back to Roswell and from there on, there have been so many incidents that have been documented involving Air Force facilities, and they've lied about that continuously. Just outright lied. So they've got a lot of explaining to do, and that's probably why they're silent right now until they're forced to explain.
So if called upon, both of you would fly to Washington, D.C. and testify in front of Congress, correct?
In a heartbeat.
Yeah, we both testified in April of 2013 at the National Press Club to 6 former members of Congress. Of course, they were willing to listen to us since they're not current members.
Right. So again, thank you both for coming on and sharing your experiences.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Matt.
These two men are American patriots. Patriots for serving our country and patriots for coming forward on a subject riddled with unimaginable stigma. They held the keys that would have released nuclear Armageddon at a moment's notice. The United States Air Force has been absent in the recent developments on UFOs. Absent in the UAP-UFO report by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Absent during the UFO hearings in Congress. The Air Force has been AWOL on this subject. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations has run counterintelligence operations regarding UFOs for decades. Lives have been destroyed in this cover-up. The United States Air Force has lied to Congress and the American people. They lied because of the elephant in the room that UFOs have been tampering with and disabling our nuclear weapons for decades, and the Air Force can't do a damn thing about it. So we close with this message to Congress. Hundreds of United States Air Force men and women have had the same experience as Captain Salas and Schindele while manning our nation's nuclear weapons. Yet with very few exceptions, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations forced our service members to sign non-disclosure agreements to never speak of their encounters. Members of Congress, this is the smoking gun. These NDAs are the paper trail. These are the documents that will reveal the incidents, the people involved, and more importantly, the Air Force personnel involved in the cover-up. Remember, the truth always wins.